The U.S. Supreme Court is going on summer break after handing down several blockbuster decisions. One issued today is a loss for President Trump's immigration policy.
The justices upheld birthright citizenship in America. They struck down President Trump's executive order to take birthright citizenship away from people who were born in this country, but whose parents are undocumented immigrants or non-citizens. And this ruling is not the end to the push from the president. He's asked Congress to pass legislation to do away with birthright citizenship.
The ruling to uphold birthright citizenship impacts a lot of people right here in the Mid-South.
Yeah, Action News 5's Imani Williams joining us live now in studio with more on this. Imani.
Well, I talked with an immigration attorney and an activist today following that SCOTUS decision, and they shared feelings of relief after that. Now, overall, both told me this SCOTUS decision was vital. They said this gave them and the communities they represent hope for the future of immigration rights in the U.S., but they were more so surprised by this decision after recent decisions by SCOTUS weakened other rights. They told me they will keep fighting and pushing for diversity.
Because they've already gutted the Voting Rights Act. They've already removed Roe v. Wade. You know, they're already rolling back a lot of the rights that people have fought for throughout history. And so that's why we were on the edge of our seats this morning. What is this decision going to be? But I think that this just kind of gives us more momentum to keep going forward.
Now, Casey Bryant, Executive Director of Advocates for Immigrant Rights, says this shows that past laws and legislation do still hold power. It also shows that the checks and balances put in place do work. Now, Oseha told me Vicendarios 901 will continue pushing for protections of immigrant families and children. Live in studio, Imani Williams, Action News 5.